Hi, I'm Mr. Rosengrant, and I have with us today Dr. William Deresiewicz, former Yale professor and author of the book Excellent Sheep, The Miseducation of American Elite, and the Way to a Meaningful Life. Dr. Deresiewicz, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times students, they're not so much maybe concerned with the actual rankings. I think what they're really concerned with is their own personal success. So the rankings give them the impression that these are better schools. If they go to the better schools, they're more likely to be successful. Um, but there's also some research that shows that maybe that's not true either, that it maybe has more to do with the actual student themselves and their own ambition, their own motivation, rather than the school. Can you speak
Yeah.
on that a little bit?
Oh, yes, yes. I mean, I think, first of all, I want to say that it's about success. I think it's also about prestige. I think it's also about status. And I think we shouldn't downplay that. I think that also plays a big role for a lot of parents. And as far as I understand, students tend to go to the most highly ranked school that lets them in. So ranking plays a huge role in student choice. And there's this idea, as you suggested, that the higher rank the school, the more likely you are to be successful in life. There was a very important study that every parent and every graduating student should know about, and I mentioned it in my book, that came out with the results that were really counterintuitive, so much so that the scholars who did it actually redid the study with a much larger sample to test their initial findings. The findings were that, in fact, there is no correlation. Now, because what they did is they didn't look at, well, what's the average salary of a Penn graduate versus what's the average salary of a Penn State graduate? Because that doesn't tell you, that doesn't control for the kinds of students that the schools admit. So what they did is they matched students who went to schools like Penn, and they chose a lot of schools, with students who got into schools like Penn, but went to schools like Penn State instead, for whatever reason, often for financial reasons. And what they found was that going to the lower ranked school had no effect on future earnings. Their future earnings were the same. Places like Penn and Princeton and Harvard have higher average incomes because of the students they admit, not because of what happens to you at those schools, or even the kinds of connections that those schools enable you to make, which they do. They certainly do enable you to make connections. But if what you're principally concerned about, as I think most kids and families are, is your future earnings, it doesn't matter. And I would also say that for a smart, hardworking, ambitious kid, there are a lot of good reasons to go to a school where they're going to stand out more. Maybe that's a Penn State, as opposed to being thrown into the shark tank with all the other students who are exactly like them, where it's going to be hard to distinguish themselves.